Have you ever watched someone smile while they destroyed something you poured your entire heart into? I have. My name is Evelyn Grant. I am 37 years old, and I was born and raised in a small coastal town in Maine before moving to the city to chase a career in operations management. For 11 years, I served as operations director at Stratos Global Logistics, a billion-dollar freight coordination firm that prided itself on precision and innovation. My work was not just a job. It was the very foundation of my life. Every system, every efficiency upgrade, every late night spent combing through data felt like building a cathedral brick by brick, except my bricks were strategies, algorithms, and workflows. And that cathedral, my masterpiece, was about to be stolen from me in the most humiliating way possible. It was a Tuesday morning in early spring, the kind of day where the city was still shaking off the chill of winter. I walked into the boardroom feeling prepared, confident even. I had my presentation queued, a sleek deck that would introduce the automated supply chain system I had spent 3.5 years designing. This system was not just an upgrade, it was a revolution in freight coordination. I knew that if implemented, it could save the company millions annually, reduce human error by over 80%, and position Stratos as the clear leader in the industry. As I spoke, I could feel the rhythm of my words gaining momentum. The slides clicked forward, charts and figures appearing in crisp animation, my voice steady and sure. But then, it happened. In the middle of a sentence, with my words still echoing through the boardroom's surround sound, Victor Lang, the CEO, raised his hand like a conductor silencing an orchestra. "Evelyn," he said with a smile that did not reach his eyes, "I think we can stop right there." I froze, the clicker still in my hand. Around the long, polished mahogany table, faces turned toward him, not me. "Your role is being eliminated, effective immediately," he announced. The words dropped into the room like heavy stones in water, rippling outward. My brain scrambled to catch up with what I was hearing. Eliminated? In the middle of my report? I had not even shown the heart of the system, the part that would make their jaws drop. The room was silent for a beat, and then there was the faint shuffling of papers, a cough, the quiet hum of the projector still casting my last slide on the wall. My stomach twisted. I tried to speak, to ask what was going on, but Victor continued, his voice warm and pleasant, as if he were congratulating me on a promotion. "We appreciate your years of service, Evelyn. We have decided to move in a different direction. Madison will be taking over your responsibilities." Madison Price, my 29-year-old former assistant, sat 2 seats away, her lips pressed together, eyes darting between me and Victor. I recognized the look in her eyes, guilt, mixed with the thrill of sudden power. The sting of the words did not come only from the fact that I was being let go, but from the way it was done, surgically, publicly, and without a shred of dignity. The rest of the executives kept their faces neutral, but I could feel their discomfort. No one spoke up. No one asked Victor why he had just gutted my career in front of them. And why would they? In corporate halls like these, survival often meant silence. I felt my hands grow cold, my pulse pounding in my ears, and yet some part of me, the part that had weathered 11 years in a cutthroat industry, forced me to stay composed. I gathered my papers slowly, methodically, pretending that my world had not just been split open. As I slid the USB drive with my entire presentation into my bag, my eyes locked with Victor's. His smile had not faded. If anything, it seemed sharper, like a man savoring a private joke. In that moment, I knew this was not about restructuring or efficiency. This was personal. And as I turned to leave that boardroom, my footsteps echoing in the sterile hallway, I made myself a silent promise. Whatever game Victor Lang thought he was playing, he had just dealt the wrong opponent out of the deck. The walk from that boardroom to my office felt like crossing a battlefield after the fighting had stopped. People glanced up from their desks as I passed, their eyes quickly darting back to their screens, as if my downfall might be contagious. I closed my office door behind me and leaned against it, my mind still replaying the scene in slow motion. Victor cutting me off mid-sentence, his polished tone, the way Madison sat there like a child waiting to open a present she had been told not to touch yet. I dropped my bag on my desk and stared out the window, watching the city hum with its usual rhythm while mine had been violently silenced. I could not make sense of it at first. Victor had always been distant but civil with me. He left me alone as long as I delivered results, and I always did. My system was the single most advanced logistics platform this company had ever seen. It was not some back-of-the-napkin idea. It was fully built, tested, and ready for deployment. The numbers alone would have had investors fighting for a stake. Why on earth would he cut me off just as I was about to unveil it? That question gnawed at me all afternoon. 2 days later, the answer walked right past me in the lobby. I was leaving after signing some final HR papers when I heard Madison's voice, sharp with excitement, carrying from the lounge area near reception. "This is going to make Victor look like a genius," she whispered to someone I could not see. "Once the system is live, the board will sign off on the expansion deal without hesitation. The investors are ready to put in $520 million. And his bonus? Well, let's just say it is going to be obscene." My stomach dropped. She was not talking about her system. She was talking about mine. In that instant, the fog cleared. This was never about downsizing or moving in a different direction. It was about stealing my work. Victor had not even tried to hide the fact that Madison would be stepping in to take over my responsibilities. Now I understood why. He needed someone pliable, someone who would smile and nod while he took the credit. And Madison, with her ambition and hunger for approval, was the perfect candidate. I walked past them without turning my head, my face neutral, my heart pounding with an anger so sharp it felt clean. When I reached the street, the wind caught my hair, and I stopped for a moment on the sidewalk. The city noise roared around me, car horns, footsteps, the hiss of buses pulling away from the curb. Somewhere in that chaos, my mind began stitching together the first threads of something dangerous. If Victor thought I was going to fade quietly into unemployment, he had underestimated me in ways he could not yet imagine. I replayed Madison's words over and over as I walked, the number 520 million searing itself into my mind. That deal was everything to him. The prestige, the money, the power, all of it hinged on my system. And he thought he could simply rip it from my hands and parade it as his own. That was the moment the hurt began to cool, hardening into something far more dangerous. Resolve. By the time I reached my apartment door, I already knew this was not the end of my story with Stratus Global Logistics. No, it was the beginning of Victor Lang's. And I was going to make sure his chapter ended with the kind of silence that would make him wish he had never spoken my name. That night, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every meeting, every signature, every document I had touched over the past 3 years while building my system. I thought about the endless nights in the office, the weekends I sacrificed, the coffee-fueled coding marathons to make sure the platform worked without a hitch. And then it hit me, the paperwork. I sat up and turned on the lamp. Somewhere in my apartment, buried in the old cardboard file boxes I kept more out of habit than need, there had to be every contract I had ever signed with Stratos. It was almost 2 a.m. when I dragged the first box onto the coffee table. The smell of paper and dust filled the room as I flipped through manila folders, skimming dates and legal headers. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but my hands kept moving. And then I saw it. The Agreement for Intellectual Property Transfer, a standard form for any proprietary system developed on company time. I remembered when Victor had handed it to me 2 years ago, saying, "We will get the signatures sorted later. No need to slow you down with red tape." At the time, I thought nothing of it. I was too focused on getting the system to run flawlessly to bother with legal minutia. But now, as I scanned the document, I realized something that sent a shiver up my spine. The final page, the one where my signature was supposed to be, was blank. I leaned back on the couch, clutching the contract like it was a live wire. The clause was there in black and white. If the transfer of intellectual property rights is not completed prior to the termination of employment, ownership remains with the original creator. My breath caught in my throat. The system was still mine. Not legally, not morally, but in every way that mattered. I read that clause 3 times, letting each word sink in. This was not just a loophole. This was leverage. If Victor went ahead and used my system for that investor deal, he would be in direct violation of the law. And with that violation, the investors would not just walk away, they would run. He could not buy his way out of this without my consent. For the first time since that humiliating meeting, a flicker of power sparked inside me. I stayed up the rest of the night going through every related document, cross-referencing dates, making sure I had not missed anything. The more I pieced it together, the more I saw the shape of the battlefield forming in front of me. Victor thought he had won because he had the stage, the audience, and the stolen performance. But I had the script and the rights to every word in it. As dawn crept in through the blinds, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the contract spread out in front of me. The city outside was waking up, but inside my apartment, I was already wide awake, sharper than I had felt in weeks. This was no longer about getting back what was mine. This was about making sure Victor Lang never forgot the day he underestimated Evelyn Grant. And I was just getting started. Once I knew the system was still mine, I realized I needed more than just a contract clause to bring Victor down. A technicality was strong, but proof of his real intentions would be devastating. That meant finding something he would never want the board, the investors, or the public to see. Something that would not just stop the deal, but stain his name so deeply it would never wash clean. For that, I knew exactly who to call. Aaron Bell, 42, had been my closest ally in the company's IT department for years. Aaron had a quiet way about him, the kind of person who blended into the background while knowing exactly where every digital skeleton was buried. We had helped each other more times than I could count. Me making sure his projects got the budget they deserved. Him making sure certain executive oversights did not fall on my head. If anyone could get me what I needed, it was him. When I called, I did not explain everything. "Aaron," I said, keeping my voice low, "I need you to check if there's anything unusual in Victor's communications about the expansion deal. Anything at all that looks personal." I could almost hear him raise an eyebrow through the phone, but he just said, "Give me a day." Less than 12 hours later, my phone buzzed with an encrypted message from him. Inside was a forwarded email chain between Victor and Eleanor Carter, our CFO. My hands tightened around the phone as I read. The email spelled out that Victor had negotiated an undisclosed personal bonus of $8 million from the investor deal, money that was never reported to the board and clearly meant to be pocketed quietly. It was not just greedy. It was a betrayal of every shareholder, every employee, and every ounce of supposed corporate ethics. I read the chain twice, my pulse quickening. Here it was, the smoking gun. If the contract clause was my shield, this email was my sword. Together, they could cut through every lie Victor had built around this deal. With them, I could force him into a corner so tight he would not be able to breathe without my permission. I sat back in my chair, the weight of it sinking in. This was not just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. For the years I had given to Stratos, for the team members who had been tossed aside for speaking up, for the quiet way Victor had built his power on the backs of people like me. I could feel the anger in me cooling into something sharper, colder, the kind of clarity you only get when you know exactly how you are going to win. As I locked the files away in my secure drive, I could almost picture his face when he saw them. That smug, controlled expression he wore like armor would crack, just for a moment, and I would be there to watch. I did not yet know when or how I would make my move. But one thing was certain. Victor Lang had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to end his reign. The following week, HR called and told me I needed to come in for a final handover of materials. The request was dressed up in polite corporate language, but I knew exactly what it meant. They wanted whatever scraps they thought I had left so Victor could sweep up the last of my work and hand it to Madison like a prize. I considered refusing, but then I realized this was an opportunity. If I went in, I could see firsthand what they had done with my office, my files, and my system. It was a chance to confirm what I already suspected. My binders, the ones containing the full architecture of the system, were still sitting right where I had left them, unsigned and untouched. When I walked back into Stratos Global Logistics, the air felt different. People glanced up from their desks with that awkward combination of curiosity and pity, like they were watching someone return to the scene of a crime. Madison was waiting for me in the lobby, dressed in a brand new blazer that still had the stiffness of something fresh off a hanger. She gave me a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "Evelyn, so glad you could make it," she said, her voice pitched just a little too high, like she was playing hostess instead of executioner. They led me to my old office, now scrubbed of any trace that I had ever been there. My photos, my coffee mug, the little paper crane one of my junior staff had given me for luck. All gone. In their place was a vase of fresh flowers on the desk, a carefully staged symbol of new beginnings for the company newsletter. And then, to add insult to injury, Madison pulled out her phone and said, "Let's get a quick picture for the team update. Show everyone the smooth transition." I stared at her, trying to decide if she was clueless or cruel, but in the end, I smiled for the camera. Because while she was busy capturing her triumphant moment, I let my gaze drift to the far shelf. There they were, 3 thick binders, each labeled with the system's development phases, exactly where I had left them the day I was fired. No transfer signatures, no official documentation sealing them as company property. Just paper, waiting. My heart gave a slow, measured thump. If they had realized the legal value of those binders, they would have been locked in Victor's office weeks ago. The fact that they were still here told me one thing. They were about to walk into a storm, and they did not even know it. As the camera clicked, I leaned ever so slightly toward Madison. "Make sure you take good care of those," I said lightly, nodding toward the shelf. She followed my gaze, then gave a quick, dismissive smile. "Of course," she said, clearly thinking I meant the flowers. That told me everything I needed to know. They had no idea what they were holding. By the time I walked out of that building, the picture of my plan was complete. I had the contract clause, the smoking gun email, and now confirmation that the system was still physically and legally mine. They had tried to humiliate me one last time, but all they had done was give me the final piece I needed to make sure their fall would be public, irreversible, and unforgettable. Victor Lang thought my story with Stratos ended the day he cut me off in that boardroom. What he did not realize was that every insult, every calculated slight, was just setting the stage for the moment I would take the floor again. And this time, I would not be the one walking out. That night, I cleared my kitchen table and spread everything out like pieces of a war map. The unsigned intellectual property contract, the forwarded email chain about Victor's secret bonus, and my own detailed notes on the system's architecture. Seeing them together was like looking at a loaded weapon in 3 separate parts. All I had to do was assemble it, aim, and pull the trigger. I was not just thinking about stopping Victor anymore. I wanted him cornered, stripped of his armor, forced to watch the power he had stolen dissolve in front of him. But this had to be done with precision. A reckless move could give him time to recover, or worse, let him spin the narrative in his favor. I had seen men like him do it before. Take a scandal and rebrand it as a misunderstood act of leadership. Not this time. I wanted his fall to be unspinnable. I began mapping a timeline. The expansion deal signing was set for a Thursday morning in mid-May. If I made my move too early, they might find a workaround. Too late, and the deal would already be sealed. The perfect moment was the night before, when the investors were committed, but nothing was finalized. A single, well-aimed strike then would collapse everything before it could stand. Every detail mattered. The letter had to be legally airtight, citing the contract clause in language so clear that even Stratos' legal team could not twist it. The email about Victor's $8 million bonus would be attached as an exhibit, an unspoken warning to the board that I had more than just a technical claim. I would address it to Victor, the full board, and the company's external legal counsel all at once, ensuring no one could bury it without leaving fingerprints. For the next week, I worked in quiet obsession. I drafted, rewrote, and polished the letter until every sentence felt like a blade. I rehearsed the exact tone, formal, cold, professional. No emotion, no bitterness, just the facts, delivered with the kind of clarity that would make them impossible to ignore. At night, I would sit on my balcony overlooking the city lights, sipping tea and picturing Victor's face as he read it. I imagined the tightening in his jaw, the way his smile would fade when he realized what it meant for him. By the time the final version was saved to my encrypted drive, I knew it was ready. I had built my system to optimize supply chains, but now I was building something much more personal, a chain reaction. One email sent at the right moment would dismantle everything Victor had worked for, leaving him with nothing but the wreckage of his own greed. As I slid the contract back into its folder and locked it away for the night, I felt something I had not felt since the day I was fired. Control. Not the fragile illusion of control you get from holding a title or a position, but the kind that comes from knowing the outcome is already in your hands. Victor Lang thought he had taken my power. What he never understood was that I had been quietly reclaiming it piece by piece, until now it was more dangerous than he could ever imagine. And in just a few short weeks, he was going to learn exactly what it meant to have it turned against him. The night before the signing, I could feel the city holding its breath. The wind rattled faintly against my apartment windows, the hum of traffic far below a steady backdrop to my thoughts. My kitchen table was bare now, except for my laptop, a printed copy of the letter, and a steaming mug of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I had rehearsed this moment so many times in my head that my hands moved almost on instinct. The cursor blinked at me from the empty to field, as if it too understood the weight of what was about to happen. I typed the addresses slowly. Victor Lang, the full Stratus Board of Directors, and their external legal counsel. Each name felt like adding another fuse to a stack of dynamite. The subject line was as sharp and unambiguous as the letter itself. Notice of intellectual property ownership and intent to enforce. There was no mistaking what this was. The body of the email was cold, professional, and utterly free of emotion. I opened with the clause from my contract, citing the exact section in line where it stated that ownership of the system remained with me due to the incomplete transfer process. I followed with a clear legal warning. Any use, deployment, or presentation of the system without my written consent would constitute a direct violation of intellectual property law. Then, without flourish or commentary, I attached the scanned email chain, Victor's hidden $8 million bonus, as Exhibit A. I made no accusations, no moral statements. I simply labeled it relevant to the context of the planned investor deal and left it at that. It was the kind of document that required no raised voice, no dramatics. The facts themselves were the blow. The more clinical and precise I made it, the more devastating it became. Victor would know exactly what it meant. Not only could I block the system's use, but I could also sink his reputation in one move. Before sending, I read it one final time. My fingers hovered over the trackpad, and for a fleeting second, I thought about the years I had given to Stratos, the nights I had left the office long after the cleaning crew, the pride I had once felt walking into that building. All of it had led here, and now it was ending in a few hundred words in a pair of attachments. I clicked send at exactly 12:04 a.m. The whoosh of the outgoing email felt louder than it should have, like the sound of a lock snapping shut. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the laptop screen soft against the dark of my apartment. Outside, the city kept moving, oblivious to the fact that somewhere in Stratus's executive inboxes, a time bomb had just been armed. I knew I would not sleep that night, but it did not matter. The letter was gone, the fuse lit, and all that was left now was to wait for the inevitable sound of everything Victor Lang had built coming down around him. And I planned to be wide awake to hear it. By 9:15 the next morning, my phone began to vibrate on the kitchen counter. At first, it was just one call, a number from Stratus's main line. I let it go to voicemail, then another, and another. By 9:30, my text notifications were stacking in rapid succession. Aaron sent a single message. Whatever you did, it worked. I turned on the news, and there it was. A short but telling report. Stratus Global Logistics had postponed its highly anticipated expansion signing with overseas investors. No reason given, no official statement yet, but the anchor's tone made it clear. Something had gone wrong and badly. My coffee sat untouched as I leaned forward, watching the footage of a silent conference hall, the press shuffling around, their cameras still aimed at an empty podium. Inside Stratos, I imagined the board scrambling, legal teams combing through my letter, investors calling in a panic. I pictured Victor, jaw tight, flipping through the contract clause over and over, realizing there was no loophole, no magic phrase to undo what he had ignored. Worse for him, I had not just blocked the system's use. I had exposed the rot underneath, neatly packaged in that Exhibit A. By noon, a headline flashed across my phone. Stratos stock dropped 17% after deal collapse rumors. It was already happening. The confidence was draining out of the company like water from a cracked pipe. I could almost hear the shareholders' outrage, their fear of being tied to a sinking ship. And Victor? He had to be cornered, his usual swagger stripped away, reduced to backroom pleas and desperate bargaining. Around 1 o'clock, I finally answered one of the calls. It was Victor himself, his voice lower, almost hoarse. "Evelyn," he began, and for the first time since I had known him, there was no false charm. "We need to talk." I let a beat of silence stretch between us before answering. "We have nothing to discuss, Victor. My position is clear." He tried to spin it, said we could work something out if I withdrew the letter. But the truth was, he had no leverage left. All I had to do was wait. That afternoon, Aaron called again, this time unable to hide the edge of disbelief in his voice. "They're holding an emergency board meeting. Without him." I stood at my window, looking down at the steady stream of cars below, and smiled. The man who had once cut me off mid-sentence now sat on the other side of a locked door, his empire crumbling without him. I did not need to be in that building to know what was happening. The moment the investors walked away, Victor became dead weight. And in a company like Stratos, dead weight was the first thing to be thrown overboard. He had built his career on other people's work, other people's silence. Today, neither of those things was going to save him. 3 days after the board meeting, the press release hit every major business outlet. Stratos Global Logistics announced that Victor Lang had chosen to step down as CEO to pursue personal ventures. It was the kind of statement companies put out when the truth is too messy for print. The reality was exactly what I had imagined. The board had pushed him out, and they had done it quickly, before the smell of the collapse could cling to them. I read the announcement over my morning coffee, a quiet satisfaction settling over me. It was not gloating. It was something cleaner. Victor had cut me off mid-sentence in that boardroom, convinced that my voice did not matter. Now, he was the one who had been silenced, his name reduced to a single polished paragraph of corporate farewell. 2 days later, I received an email from a name I did not recognize, Michael Carver, CEO of Titan Nexus Technologies. He had heard about the system, had followed the fallout at Stratos, and wanted to meet. "We value innovation," his message read, "but we value integrity more. I think you may have both." I stared at the screen for a long moment before replying. The meeting was nothing like my old life at Stratos. Titan Nexus's offices were open, bright, filled with the hum of people actually building things rather than just guarding their positions. Michael asked me to walk him through the system from start to finish. He listened, really listened, asking questions that proved he understood its potential. by the end of the meeting, he slid a folder across the table. Inside was an offer: Chief Innovation Strategist, full equity in the system, and a seat at the table where decisions were made. The kind of recognition Stratos had never once offered me in 11 years. I accepted on the spot. It was not just about the title or the compensation. It was about walking into a place where my work would not be hidden behind someone else's smile. A week later, I moved into my new office. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of the city skyline, and a door with my name on it in crisp lettering. On the wall behind my desk, I hung 2 frames: my Stratos termination letter and the printed copy of Victor's $8 million bonus email. They were not trophies. They were reminders of what I had survived, of what I had built, and of what happens when someone mistakes quiet dedication for weakness. Victor Lang was gone from Stratos, his name already fading from headlines. I, on the other hand, was just beginning a chapter he would never get to read, and I intended to write every line of it myself. Some mornings I arrive at my office early, before the rest of the floor comes alive. The light filters in through the wide windows, spilling across my desk, catching the edges of the 2 frames hanging behind me. The first holds my termination letter from Stratos Global Logistics, the neat, soulless corporate script informing me that my role was being eliminated. The second is the email chain that sealed Victor Lang's fate, his $8 million secret laid out in black and white. To anyone else, they might seem like strange decorations. To me, they are the story of my rebirth. Every time I glance at them, I remember the boardroom silence, the smug smile on Victor's face, the moment I walked out thinking my career was over. And then I remember the long nights at my kitchen table, the careful piecing together of every fact, every document, every move, until the day came when the balance of power shifted in my hands. At Titan Nexus Technologies, my name is on every project I create. My system is now fully operational, generating the kind of efficiency gains I once dreamed about. Except this time, I am not watching from the sidelines while someone else takes the credit. My team respects me, my CEO trusts me, and every investor meeting ends with my voice being heard from start to finish. The contrast is almost poetic. Sometimes I think about Victor. I imagine him somewhere far from the executive stage, perhaps still trying to convince himself that what happened was a matter of bad luck rather than a consequence of his own arrogance. But I do not dwell on him. The truth is, I do not need to. His downfall is written into the walls of my office, framed for anyone to see, while my success grows taller with each passing day. People often say revenge is about making the other person suffer. I do not see it that way anymore. For me, it became about reclaiming the narrative, about making sure the last chapter did not belong to the man who tried to erase me, but to the woman who refused to disappear. Victor handed me the match when he fired me. All I did was strike it. Now, when I lock my office door at the end of the day, I glance at those 2 frames one last time. They do not represent the worst moment of my life. They represent the proof that sometimes the ending you think is written in stone is only the beginning of the story you are meant to tell, and mine is far from over.